instead of diagnosing a condition, we're
Mhm.
actually trying to evaluate the entire person and the entire ecosystem of of
Mm.
the body, this entire landscape. And that is a traditional approach of Ayurveda, which is very drastically different from just modern medicine, and they both have their value.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Ancient Health Podcast, where East meets West. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Motley. And today I have the honor of talking with one of the leading experts in Ayurvedic medicine. And she is a third generation Ayurvedic practitioner. And I just want to say that when we talk about Chinese medicine, you have to look back at Ayurvedic because it is, I, we're going to talk with Nidhi about all the ancient aspects of how old this healing art is. So, first of all, thank you so much, Nidhi Pandya, coming on here. And we are so grateful because we're going to talk about your new book, Your Body Already Knows. And I'm telling you what, I've already been reading through it here at the office and trying to tell my patients while they're here on the table. I'm like, I know what's going on with you after I've been reading. So thank you so much for coming on. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such an honor, and I love the work you do. So, really grateful to be here, talking
Oh,
to you.
thank you, thank you. I know we've had you on the podcast before, and you were talking with my former co-host Courtney, and we were talking about we had different aspects of Ayurvedic medicine. Again, guys, is one of the deepest healing and traditions and historical ways of analyzing health that I know because I have a practitioner friend here that literally he was a Chinese medicine practitioner. He turned more into Ayurvedic, and I know you do this, but he would do some pulse and tongue and facial and would read my mail. And it was amazing, but he did it with such just efficiency. Could you explain to the individuals out there a bit about yourself? I want to hear
Mm-hmm.
about you, who you
Mm-hmm.
are, and then why you came into this art form. To me, it's art. So could you describe yourself a bit?
Yeah, thank you. So, Dr. Motley, I am Nidhi Pandya. I live in New York and I'm an Ayurvedic doctor. I grew up with Ayurveda because my grandfather was an Ayurvedic healer, and I grew up in this large joint family of 14 people. And I
Wow.
would say that Ayurveda is the first language that I spoke, which meant that everything that I was taught about how to live, how to eat, how to interact had an Ayurvedic lens without ever using the formal declaration of according to Ayurveda. So to give you an
Mm,
example, right? I was like, hey, it's evening time. Are you sure you want to eat that? It's going to be harder to digest because it's evening. So right there, as a young girl, I'm making these connections. Oh, evening, it's harder to digest.
mm,
This food is probably heavy. You
mm,
know, I and then I would see somebody else tolerating the food or not tolerating the food. So, I basically grew up in a playground and my research laboratory, and I was super sensitive and curious. And then I had all of these principles, not prescriptions, principles flying around
mm,
and in
mm.
conversation. So I made all of these amazing connections with the world around us and the patterns of the human body. And Ayurveda is big about in bio individuality, which again is something that I got to witness as a young girl because when you're living with so many people, and my grandfather being the patriarch of the family, really the leader of the family, and we would hear dialogues like, oh, like for example, he would tell my cousin that listen, when you're going out in the sun, you should be a little extra careful. So right there, as a young girl, I'm making this connection. Hey, because your body can get heated up quickly. So I'm making this connection. Oh,
Mm,
there are certain people who have a tendency to get heated up quickly. Or two of us eat the same food but have different reactions. One produces more phlegm and mucus, and the other one can enjoy it, with freedom. So
mm,
when I started making these connections, and especially, and this happens in all your bodies. Your physical body is one aspect, but the mental body, which is the body of your thoughts, and the emotional body, which is the body of your feelings, they
mm,
all respond very differently to stimulus depending on who you are and depending
mm,
on the time of the day as well, even for a certain individual. So I was making all these connections and I was very curious. As a result, I went on to study Ayurveda formally. I had an
mm.
academic, I did the whole traditional education in Ayurveda. And then I started practicing it as a normal Ayurvedic doctor does, which means I tell you what's wrong with you and then I give you prescriptions and I tell you how to fix it. However, sooner than later, I would say my journey took me into understanding that in today's day and age, Ayurveda needs to be practiced not only as a diagnostic medical path, diagnostic and treatment, but also as a preventative.
Mm,
So my life's work has now evolved into helping people to understand their bodies and understand the patterns of the universe and how it relates to themselves
mm,
without having to get too prescriptive. I don't want to be the expert. Like I want to help you to be the expert is
mm.
so I've moved to that.
Oh, it's like learning how to take information that you've learned about how to be observant, about what you can learn about the body and how you can see it, but explain it to somebody to teach them, right? I think they say that the doctor means teacher, like you need to teach in your life. And you saw these examples, individuals out there today in the modern healthcare system. And no knock on my friends who are there, many of them are doctors, like in the medical realm that go straight medical. Um, it's tough for them because they are saying that they're not listened to, that they're not paid attention to, or the signs and symptoms that they give their doctor are just things that are pretty much dismissed. Like, oh, you have your nail beds or cuticles, or your nails are showing or flaking off. You're seeing different types of skin conditions. And one of the biggest things I know we talked about even before coming on here, it's huge for both of us, is like late women's health. I mean, literally, like they can say something like, I'm bloating after every time I eat, or during my cycle, there's pain. And I know this is very broad, though, Doc, but when we talk about women's health, how important in the Ayurvedic realm, or is women's health, as is it one of like the main things that you treat with Ayurvedic health, because this has become a big subject out there.
Absolutely. And because it's become such a big subject out there, it's more and more women have assumed different responsibilities. We're living differently from what our ancestors did. And we've lost a little bit of that wisdom that we carried about our own bodies. And women also have many more cycles than a male does. A male has more
Mm,
settled cycles, from menarche to menopause to every menstrual cycle, and before and after. A woman's body goes through many, many changes.
mm,
Um, and I think with those changes, with that adaptability, also comes this volatility. And every shift is this opportunity for either health or disease or discomfort.
mm.
So it's a big area of the work I do in terms of prevention, care, and treatment.
Oh, yes. I love asking these things because this is where I get it to. Okay, so when you look at, let's say, women's, like if somebody had PCOS, if somebody had like endometriosis, are there some telltale signs that you would pay attention to, like on the body, or representations on the body or the skin, that would let a lady know that there could be something that they are missing and they need to get a little more, investigating about?
So, right here, I want to go back a little bit and say, how is it that we look at disease, right? So,
Mhm.
we may not call, yes, somebody may come to me would say, hey, do I have PCOS? And yes, I may be able to make a diagnosis. But really, instead of diagnosing a condition, we're
Mhm.
actually trying to evaluate the entire person and the entire ecosystem of of
Mm.
the body, this entire landscape. And that is a traditional approach of Ayurveda, which is very drastically different from just modern medicine. And they both have their value. So, in terms of if somebody came to me and said, hey, I'm experiencing, do I have PCOS? My real questions would be like to understand the patterns of their body, of their
Mm.
digestion, of their sleep and wake, but also the causes they're consuming. Ayurveda uses this word. What are the causes that you're consuming? Which means, what are the causes that you're creating in your life that can create disease? So the diagnosis,
Mm.
actually, the first principle of diagnosis in Ayurveda is to understand the cause of the condition.
Oh, can understand the cause of the condition. Beautiful, beautiful. And that's like the first steps. Like when you're learning this in school, you have to learn the cause for the condition.
The cause of the condition. So the minute, so so when I meet a new patient, it'll be like a 2-hour intake, and
Mm,
but it's often like a therapy session. But the minute you understand, what's happening in their digestion, what are they consuming, how are they living, what's on their mind, what's in their physical body, their entire landscape of their body starts becoming clear to you. Now,
mm,
with PCOS and PCOD, and I mean, of course, these are presented more with blockages, and you'll see that the blockages and overgrowth is not just in their ovaries. It's not it. it is a systematic. They'll often have digestive problems. They'll often have growth in unwanted places. They will have, of course, clinically, they will see that they have high testosterone. But I mean, of course, that hair, unwanted hair growth, unwanted balding, there'll be a little bit more harshness in their features that has come about. It can be very, very subtle, you know?
Mm.
So, but it's the job, my job as a doctor will be to really go into all of their landscape, because you may come to me for a condition, but I will help you to heal the whole person and not just treat the condition.
That is amazing because so when you look at the digestion, when you look at how a person should eat, I know it's only you have a short amount of time we can talk, but I love this. So if somebody comes to you and let's say they do have hormones and you are looking at the whole picture, Ayurvedic takes into account not only like if a food necessarily is healthy, but you're saying also that certain people should eat certain types of food, particularly for their health, like an individual's health. Like they should have certain types of food to help, like their hormonal health or the digestive health.
Yes, absolutely, but it's not either or. So
Mm,
I would say the first thing is that our, our hormones are like they're messengers, right? Like so they're basically a way of us establishing rhythms, whether it's hormones, and hormones and neurotransmitters throughout the day or it's throughout the month. They
mm,
basically give a clock to the body and they say, hey, this is the time, this is what you do. And it's all clocks are connected. Every rhythm in the universe is connected for this amazing orchestra to happen. And this is the Ancient Health podcast, so I can use this language without sounding like, I'm too crazy. But really, right? I mean, but if you imagine like even for a single minute, the Earth decides to stop rotating
mm-hmm,
and you're going to see there's everything on the planet is going to go haywire, right? Because the revolutions will change and the timing of year changes and then the season, everything changes, right? So
yeah,
similarly, all of that, kind of everything in the universe happens in patterns, right? That's what makes it systematic and beautiful, and that's what has
mm,
made us survive for 4.5 billion years. This planet has thrived. But and today, when you see suddenly there's freak snow in the summer and the summer feels like winter, something has gone off. So when it comes to female hormones, the encouragement is to start looking at it as seasons and to know that when the season, if there is an unwanted seasonal pattern, something is going on. But then what I
mm,
really look at is I say, look at all your patterns. Very often I'll find these are people who are not having their daily elimination. They
mm-hmm,
are so that means that that's one clock that's off. They're not sleeping. They don't have regular sleep pattern. They're not
mm-hmm,
sleeping at night. That's the second clock off. And they're eating against the circadian rhythm. They may be eating very big dinners and maybe light lunches. So even before what it is that you're eating, the first question I'll ask is how are you living and how are you living according to the rhythms of
mm,
the sun and the moon, because that's what this is all about, it's all connected. And most often you'll find the solution there, even just sometimes it's as simple as switching from that heavy dinner to a heavier lunch and going light on the dinner. And then we go into the second phase of saying, what is your individual body like? What else are you experiencing? And how can I support you with lifestyle changes, with dietary changes, and with herbs? The phases that we go through, from our follicular phase to the ovulatory phase to the luteal phase to the menstrual phase, those are all cycles that we go through. They're all seasons in the body. So if they're
mm,
not happening in order, if they're not happening systematically, if one day you're bleeding on day 18 and the a second cycle you're bleeding on day 38 and you're all erratic periods, which is often what happens when somebody has PCOS. And since we started there, like right there and then I'm like, okay, your seasons are off, your menstrual seasons are off, right?
mm,
So that's where we start. But these seasons are connected to the large, everything needs a rhythm. So when I say that, the first thing I fix work with them is how are they living according to the circadian clock? How are they sleeping? How are they eating? And you fix that rhythm. When you fix the rhythm of when you eat, when you sleep, when is the right time for certain activities based on the sun and the moon, which
oh
means
yeah,
you're flowing with the tide. And you will be surprised to hear that many times it's just when they make these shifts, they're like, oh my god, it was this easy. I started eating a heavier lunch, I started eating a lighter dinner, I started going to bed at 10 p.m, and now suddenly I'm having bowel movements every day. And I'm like, let's wait and watch what happens next. And they're like, suddenly I'm sleeping much better. I'm like, let's wait and watch what happens next. And then suddenly my period is on time and it feels much better than it ever did before. And this is the beauty, right? And of course, it's not, so this is one aspect, but what I would also do, and no matter what condition you came to me with, the first thing I would do is fix your clock because that is so huge. You don't want to be swimming against the tide. You want to swim with the tide, with the sun and the moon, the diurnal mammals. And the second thing that I would do is change the way they eat, um, so, to at least bring it to cooked foods that are spiced. And today there's a lot of research being done on why all ancient cultures that knew a little thing or two about about health, used spices in their foods. Good fats,
Mhm.
spices, cooked foods. I will bring it to that. I'm like, that's all you do for me. You can pick the cuisine you want. You never have to eat turmeric just because I'm an Ayurvedic doctor. You never have to eat Indian food just because I'm an Ayurvedic doctor. You do your food. I will tell you how to use the good fats. I will tell you how to use the spices in them, and you go for that heavier lunch. So I bring these in, uh, and you'll see that I think 60-70%
Yeah.
of their sentences start to disappear even before we start
Wow.
herbs.
Wow. Doctor, this is amazing. So, okay, these are maybe basic questions, but many people out there are going to listen, think about this though. Like, so from the Ayurvedic spectrum, what would be a general time? Like, okay, so to wake up, is there a particular time? I want to go through the day because people are going to want to know when should I wake up?
Yes. Yes. All right. And I want anyone who's listening to, because I don't want this to be prescriptive, right? So I want anybody who's listening to understand the way we process this, and do it only if it makes sense to your logical brain. Everything that I teach, I'm like, don't listen to me. Let's see if this makes sense to you. And I'll tell you the first principle, which all, it's an Ayurvedic principle, but also all philosophers of the world in the world at some point discovered this: as above, so below. As is the macro, such is the micro. You
Mhm.
know, as is the human body, as is the universe, such is the human body. And it's all said in different ways. But in Ayurveda, this is a very fundamental principle, which means that if I'm a diurnal mammal, which means I wake up, I don't have nighttime vision. I wake up with the sun and I start to wind down as the sun begins to wind down, sun begins to set. My cycles are very aligned with the sun's cycle. So now I'm going to look
Mm.
outside to see what's happening in the body inside. So the hours between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. in the morning. All right. So that's 6 a.m. and 10
To
a.m.
10 a.m.
What happens outside if you were to walk on grass? The sun is barely coming up. The grass is wet and dewy. The earth is still a little sluggish, right, from its
Yeah.
night spell. And that's exactly what the human body is at that hour, because it's, if you notice, people who are prone to congestion have nasal congestion in the morning. You could not show off in a yoga class because your joints are still stiff. So just as the sun is barely rising, your body is rising, and it's still wet and sluggish from the night, from that lunar phase. And in that time, the best thing to do is to warm it up, to fire it up through exercise. Best time
Mm.
to exercise in the morning,
Mhm.
and to eat a warm, light breakfast. Breakfast is not the biggest meal. That's something that's so new to our world. It's only the 1900s that we decided that breakfast was the biggest meal of the day. It's not. For most of our history, breakfast has not been the biggest meal of the day. There's
Really? Oh, wow. This is great. This is great.
Yeah, this is so if you look up the history, it's very, very recent. So breakfast is warm and light, but warm. To drink a smoothie in the morning, to drink a cold juice in the morning, to eat excessive fruits in the morning would be adding to your wet and soggy climate. That again is a
Oh.
very recent. If you look at all the blue zones, nobody ate fruit in the morning. Nobody ate cold smoothies in the morning. I've seen people drink mugs of cold smoothies, jars of smoothies, and say, I don't feel hungry. It's amazing because there's 400 calories and then I can, stretch myself for the whole day. Of course you are, because you're shutting down your juices, your warm, nice juices right there in the morning. So 6 a.m. to 10 a.m.,
Mhm.
warm, light breakfast. And before that, you exercise to warm it up. Between 10 and 2, as the sun is rising, the body's fire heat is rising, your gastric juices are rising, your attention and focus is can be used to do collaborative work. Heat outside, heat inside. So you do collaborative work. All offices, most of that work that requires collaboration happens between 10 and 2. But also, as the sun is at its peak, there are gastric juices that have a natural high, whether it's gastrin, whether it's your body's ability to be sensitive to insulin. Those are all at its peak during the hours between 10 and 2. So the biggest meal is lunch. Uh,
Biggest meal's lunch. Okay.
Biggest meal is lunch. So between 10 and 2, get your collaborative work done. And very often when people don't get lunch during that time, they can get hangry. If you don't get dinner, you can get cranky, but if you don't get lunch, you get hangry because it's heat. Between 2 and 6, as the sun is setting and the
Hmm.
experience of wind outside is increasing, very often that's what happens in the human body as well, right? That's why we're at our desks, we're stretching away between
Yep.
the hours of 2 and 6 because wind outside, wind inside. Great time to have a breath practice, to go and take a little walk, but to also actively remind yourself that this is a time I start to slow down after 4:30. Instead of going and drinking that big cup of black coffee or whatever caffeine to say, I'm just going to extend my day, it's ideal to reserve the least the least difficult tasks of the day during those hours between 2 and 6.
Mm.
And then 6 to 10, beautiful birds are going back to their nests, the earth is settling down for the night. Great time, such an introspective time, such a grounding time. And when we decide to be very active during these hours, often it can create anxiety over a period of time
Yes.
because we're
Yeah.
against the neurotransmitters. We are these inhibitory mediators emerge in our body that want to take us to bed. So between 6 and 10, dimming the lights, taking it easy. And 10 o'clock is that sweet period to go to bed because between 10 and 2, magic happens in the body. All that it's like going to the doctor and coming back, all while you're sleeping and chilling in your bed, cozy in your covers, right? Because your body goes through this deep repair as melatonin rises between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Very often people wake up to pee, to urinate at the end of that nighttime repair and metabolic cycle.
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh, and suddenly the body temperature changes because that cycle is just completed for a lot of people that can
Ah.
happen. Uh, and then after 2, even more magic happens. If you can continue to sleep from 10 and 2 after 2, then your body has a surge in prolactin, growth hormone, starts regenerating new cells. So what a beautiful time between 2 and, again, 6 in the morning. So which meant I went through all the 6 phases of the day. Um, and 6 a.m., depending, for most places on the planet, between if the sunrise is 6:30, sunset is 6:30, you want to rise with the sun, around the sun, maybe 30 minutes before, 30 minutes after. A little bit
Oh.
earlier is fine too if you have a meditation or a grounding practice in the morning. Yogis woke up 96 minutes before sunrise because they had, if you're doing that serious meditative practice or a yoga practice, then waking up early is beneficial. But otherwise, 30 minutes before or after is usually great for most people. And then getting back in bed by around 10 o'clock is wonderful.
Wow. This is like to me that how the people out there listening are like the the natural rhythm is matching what metabolically our organs are supposed to do at those particular times. Like you're just describing it, like with the digestion heating up and like eating, because I always wondered about that because I naturally didn't, I always felt better with a warm breakfast. I really did. I never felt like I really want to do anything really cold in the morning. And I'm personally speaking, I'm a thinner guy, but I always felt better eating bigger lunches. And people say, well, you need to
Mhm.
eat bigger breakfast. I said, it always weighed me down. I never felt like I was
Mm.
going fully. So you have the pattern and that routine. When you see like people can go to bed at that particular time, when is a person, this is really important to me, telling patients, when do they supposed to have a bowel movement? I mean, really, like, is there particular times to get elimination and such in the day?
If you live like this for 3 or 4 weeks, most people, and you're eating cooked warm foods at all meals, you'll start noticing that you're having a bowel movement at least in the AM.
Yeah.
So over a period of time, the first thing, right now, your body's ability to go into peristalsis is the highest, like in that early morning period.
Hmm.
Where it's there's a surge in acetylcholine, and your body's getting ready to pump out whatever feces you have in there. So in India, you'll find that it's so funny. It's a tradition. You teach children to wake up and to go and try to sit on the pot and squat to have a bowel movement,
Oh,
like this tradition. It's a whole tradition to do that. And
wow.
there's several families that would still do that. The minute you wake up, before you put anything in your mouth, it's like it's a regular question. Did you
Yeah.
go today? Did you go today? And so ideally you want to go as soon as you wake up. Like that means you're gold, you're great.
Yep.
But if not, at least in the AM.
Yes, yes. I think that like with the patterns, because that's most of the time with like in Chinese medicine world, I remember like when I was really sick, I would have spottiness throughout the day. When I really got a lot of my liver cleansed, I was going every single morning, which was amazing. So you
Beautiful.
you have that pattern, and I think that people out there when they know that there's a pattern of life, it's really important that it's leading into how we create energy. And I'm saying like in the energetic, this means that we can create energy in a healthy format. What are some of the healthier like exercises or routines? I know we talked about that you would suggest by Ayurvedic. Is it strictly yoga, stretching? Is there certain things you find that help accentuate the energetic output really well?
No, and this is a great question, but it depends from person to person. If you are the person who likes to exercise the least, you need it the most. So for those with the word I use, and it's quite intuitive, so I'm not going to, unless there's an explanation needed, I'll say you're a sluggish inner climate. Let's say that your body has a climate inside, and if your
Hmm.
in your body has a sluggish inner climate, which means that moving is a little hard for you. Netflix is your best friend. Your body likes to build and store tissue, excessive tissue. Your problems may be obesity, diabetes, plaque in your arteries, any of these things, right? Which means your body is building. There's sluggishness in there. There's lack of flow. You need exercise the most, and you need exercise that's going to
Mm,
make you sweat. That's going to make you sweat and actually open your pores and get those toxins out, right? We Sweat is a big medicine in Ayurveda. So if just with a sluggish inner climate, cardio is as welcome. In fact, there's so many forms of martial arts, so many other things that are back in the whole Vedic tradition where Ayurveda comes from. So
yeah.
whether it is spinning, whether it's going for a swim, whether it's doing dance, even dance forms, highly welcome. For those whose bodies are very depleted,
Hmm.
which means that you can barely keep anything on, you have a drier skin, drier hair, maybe some bloating, maybe some anxiety. So that's all like a drier inner climate, more like just a cold desert. And those need a little bit more restorative.
Oh yes.
So for you, yoga, for like those people, if you're one of them who is listening, yoga is great. Go slow. Even swimming can work because swimming is not aggressive if you want to build. So you go slow. And for somebody with a very hot body,
Hmm.
which means there's a lot of inflammation, there's anger, there's burning on your skin, there's skin conditions, there's burn acidity and digestive issues, and they all. If you have that hot and humid inner climate, yes, you want to sweat because you can release some of that. But if you're not sweating enough, then you want to go for something like swimming. Because a lot of times people who become very hot, their pores also get blocked out. They get clogged out, so they may not sweat easily. So swimming can make them overheated.
Hmm. Hmm.
Sorry, not swimming. Exercise can make them overheated. So then for them, I say you go swimming. So I tell people you pick the form of exercise that you like, and let's see if your body will agree to it. So Ayurveda is amazing because it's the science of life. It doesn't limit you with like, this is what the yogis did, so this is what you should do. As long
Mm.
as I can give it a lens, as long as it can support your inner climate, you can do it. You can come up with the 100th new form of exercise today in the world. But if I can put this Ayurveda is a lens. And it's understanding the
Mm.
patterns. If you can understand the lens and you can understand the patterns, anybody can do anything. That's why I say you don't have to eat Indian food to be Ayurvedic.
Wow, it's man, blowing my mind, doctor. So, what would you say though? I know this is probably on a side note, like when somebody gets up and says, "I want to do a sauna" because it heats them up, gets their fire going. But I mean, I've done it before and it actually helps me feel pretty good. But like cold baths, is there any in Ayurvedic? Is there any place for cold baths or doing something like an ice bath?
Yeah. And so, firstly, I do want to say, even for saunas, but if people who are very hot and dry in their body, like they have red eyes, they have like burning throats, and they get stressed very easily, intensity for them, hot saunas can
Hmm.
actually have a negative impact. So they want to be very careful because they're already depleted of their body's fluids, and it can leave them more parched, leave them more thirsty, leave them more intense. So you want to be
Mm.
careful because you brought up saunas. It's not for everybody. It's absolutely not fair. I mean, Ayurveda is bigger on steam because it has a little bit more moisturizing, like a wet sauna rather than a dry sauna. Now it comes for cold baths. The traditional Ayurvedic texts explain this so beautifully. They talk about winter and they explain the concept of brown fat. Like this was
Mm.
explained 5,000 years ago, right? And in so many words, except for the fact that it's a brown fat, it was like this, just this kind of fat that is generated in your body. So, we're warm beings, we're warm blooded, right? And Ayurveda is very big about remembering that. So we consume warm foods, and we have warm blood and warm breast milk, and we eat warm, but you're born from our mother's breast. But this cold showers, not tremendous ice baths, but a small exposure to something cold, right? Because what it allows you to do, it closes you. This I'm going to give you the Ayurvedic explanation, right? That's what
I
Ayurvedic,
love
it
this.
closes
Love this.
it closes your pores, right? So
Uh-huh.
it keeps the heat inside your body. So
Keeps it
the
in.
because just because of the constriction of the pores, and the heat is trapped inside the body, and now that heat serves, like, it creates this, in the modern terminology, thermogenesis, which
Mm.
creates this brown fat. But Ayurveda explains it the same exact way, except for that it explains that because of the constriction of the pores and the retention of the heat inside the body, this magic can happen of creation of your own fuel, and that brown fat is your own body's fuel that it can now use to fuel its metabolic activities.
Oh, heavens, that's amazing. So it can actually create the brown fats that gives you the fuel for the day when you go through that. Wow.
And fuel for your, like, basically all the metabolic activities in the
Everything.
body. Yeah. So I think better energy, better stress control, better life of your mitochondria, better tolerance of the winter, better digestion, all of it. So I would say, what's safe is a few seconds or up to maybe even a minute or two of a cold shower at the end of your shower could be very
Yeah.
useful, especially if you're living in a colder place in any of the hemispheres. Very, very useful. Tremendous amounts of ice baths, I think, can be dangerous. Those were a very yogic practice. And beyond a certain, threshold, and if you're not matching it up with a breath practice and appropriate lifestyle, I think they can hurt your capillaries and break, that's what an Ayurvedic doctor will tell you, that they can actually break the capillaries inside, and they can harden your skin, and they can create other trouble. So you need a very strong breathwork practice. You need a
Yeah.
very strong lifestyle. I mean, these were not even things that were taught to a commoner back in the day. You had to be living in the Himalayas. You had to meet that cold exposure. You needed to do your breathwork. You needed to follow a certain life.
To me, I love this because I love these. They're they're practical in the one step, but I'm learning so much. So, like, let's say after they get up, they do in their practice, they eat a light, warm breakfast. I know it's very individual for people out there, but there's so many people that come to you probably and ask you, doctor, what do I do for like what is you said foods that are really fatty, foods that are not so fat, foods that have spices and such. Is there, I hate to ask, like a general rule or general rules for food intake to give you
Yeah.
sustained energy throughout the day?
Absolutely. It's easier than what most people think. And for most people, a family of even 5, 7 people, you can eat in a very similar manner, to be honest with you.
Mm,
So
mm,
you don't, while bio individuality is a thing, it comes in more so when you're experiencing an imbalance. If you're not experiencing an imbalance, there's a certain state of homeostasis which all of us witness, and it all requires a similar kind of eating. So, for example, when I say, so any type of warm foods with spices, now that could look like a piece of sourdough toast with a drizzle of olive oil and black pepper. That could look like a warm oatmeal porridge
mm-hmm,
with cinnamon. That could look like a hot cup of spiced milk with turmeric. So you
mm,
pick it. But all I say is that make sure that if it doesn't have a natural fat in it, you drizzle some fat on it, whether it's olive oil, whether it's ghee, not refined.
mm,
I say refined fats are like fossil fuels in the body. They create all those toxic waste and free radicals. So
mm,
that's it's exactly what is happening outside with fossil fuels. It happens with our body in our body with refined fats. But a good extra virgin olive oil, good quality ghee, you have good quality butter, go for it. Add a spice to it because the spice helps you to not only digest that food better, but also to there's metabolic waste, even from cooking, even from digesting. There's waste created in the body. There's waste created from the breakdown of the food because it's a chemical reaction. And the
mm.
spices, which are now anti-inflammatory, the world has discovered that most spices are anti-inflammatory. It will help, and antioxidants. It'll help to kind of undo that free radical damage that can happen as a
Ah.
result of your own bodies. So they're detoxifying. So I'd say always add a spice. And you don't have to be married to a certain spice. Like anything that's you can do anything. You can do bay
That's what I was
leaves,
gonna.
cloves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cloves are like you just can add one you want. Okay.
You get what you want, of course. Not spicy, but spices, and they're quite different.
Oh, oh,
Like if you're
gotcha.
going to put sriracha on everything, you're just going to burn your mucosal lining. So that's not what you're doing, right? So it's not spicy, it's just spices. something that you'll find in the spice aisle of the grocery store, but is not going to burn on your tongue so much. So,
Mm.
so that would be like a breakfast thing. Now, lunch would be again a whole lunch. Like when you say a whole lunch, what everybody intuitively, traditional foods had all these elements. Whether you had greens, you had a little bit of meat, you had your veggies, different colored veggies, you have greens. You make sure it's cooked in a good fat, throw in a few spices, bay leaf or whatever it is. And if you don't have spices, just choose a condiment which has good spices. Even if you're eating outside, throw in some black pepper. And there you go. It's not very complicated, right? As long as
Ah.
it's warm, as long as it's warm, as long as it's cooked with some good fat, and whether you're putting a table spice or you're cooking it with spices, cooking it is better if you can just throw in the spices earlier on in the process. But that's really, and then your food is Ayurvedic.
Oh, this is so good. So you have the principles, which has been shown through time, like that these would actually help prolong life, give you a good day. And what are some of the well, I could get into mental practice. I know there's meditation, and do they suggest like in Ayurvedic that you said in the mornings when yogis get up, they'll meditate or they'll have prayers? I mean, I like to know this. Is there like particular amount of time that a yogi or somebody would say, okay, you should be in prayer or meditation this long in the day? Like, is there a particular time?
So there's a lot of Ayurvedic rituals in the morning, and I should say that because I talked about directly about breakfast and exercise. But there's a ton of Ayurvedic rituals. If you look at the ancient texts, you're like, I have to be a king who's not at a war, who's not thinking of prosperity to be doing all these rituals, right? And part of those rituals, I mean, even exercise is brought up back there. It's amazing that 5,000 years ago, these textbooks talk about exercise and they talk about the exact benefits of the exercise. So while I'm here with this audience, and I'll say that uh, meditation comes more from yoga and Ayurveda as sister sciences,
Hmm.
right? But most people in the Ayurvedic world will be meditating. But there are other Ayurvedic rituals which also get you to that safe place and outside and inside that nourish your body. And I would love to talk about them as well after this.
Yeah.
So
Yes. Yes.
yeah, so there is no particular, there's a time when you meditate, but there's no time for how you meditate, because the goal of meditation is
Ah,
to come into a certain state. And the more you practice, the easier it becomes for you to get into that state of, you know, where you've lost yourself, basically. You've
yeah.
dissolved with that oneness. Um, so, and some people can get there. Ideally, a lot of traditional practices, it's 48 minutes. 48 minutes is a, there's like a time period.
Mhm.
The day is broken into instead of an hour, it's like it's broken into these several periods of 48 minutes.
Oh, wow. So you go by small sections of time throughout the day. That's really good. Very, very nice. And when you have the prayers, like, because you're taking into account, um, like you're teaching people as a doctor to listen to their bodies, to use all aspects like body, spiritual, physical, chemical. We can talk even more. Like, I don't want to interrupt your flow because this is really
No, no,
great.
no, no, no. It's not at
I
all. We
love
just
this. I love these aspects. So when we get into now really big in the healthcare world is the talk about longevity. And I want you with Ayurvedic, I know these practices will create longevity, but are there practices or things that you would recommend saying, hey, this is what you need to do for
yes.
your long life?
Yes. Oh my God, this is such a great question. And I love this and I talk about this a lot. So there are two principles, right? Like, firstly, drying is dying. And I'll explain
Oh,
that further, right?
oh,
And the
yes.
second is that the number of breaths that you come with are predetermined. So let's like break this down, both of them, right? Because this is everything. This is everything, right?
Wow.
So adolescence, like that's that you're basically born for that whole period of our youth, to be honest with you, right?
Mm,
Because we're
mm,
building before that in childhood. We're not really creating so much in the world, we are building. And then you go through this whole period of youth from like 13, 14, all the way till your 60s. Um, for men, for women, it's a little bit earlier. And that's your productive time on the planet, really, where you're contributing to the planet. And, whether it's reproductively or in any other way. And that is the time of youth. After, on the other side of that, is natural body starts to decay. But what
mhm.
leads to that, if what leads to that rapid depreciation? What leads to this process being expedited? And that is the drying. We start out like grapes, we end up as raisins. You can see all wrinkled,
Mhm.
shriveled
Yeah.
up. what we are losing, and it's not water, but we are losing our essential fluids.
Oh,
Discs lose their fluids, we lose our collagen, we burn out, right? So in Ayurveda, there's this beautiful definition of the peak of our, in the peak of our adolescence, we are like this oil lamp filled with oil. So there's fuel and there's fire. How quickly do you burn your fuel? Now,
wow.
this would mean, and honestly, our lifestyles have become
Yes.
too solar, and solar is not just the dehydration from the sun. Solar means we're working too much, we're working too hard, we're staying awake for more hours than we can afford, we're drinking too much caffeine, we're drinking too much alcohol. Anything that
Yes.
dries you, these are all very drying, and it's very intuitive. You can say stress is very drying, you can say anger is very drying, staying up for too many hours is very drying, overworking is drying, overworking out is drying, right? Caffeine is drying. We feel it. You feel dehydrated. Alcohol is drying. Eating fats, eliminating all the good fats from foods, all low fats, extremely diet foods, those are all drying. And
Mm,
the sooner you dry yourself up, the sooner you die. So there's a lot of Ayurvedic
wow.
practices. That's why good fats are important. But all of Ayurveda's rituals are about oiling. We oil our body before you shower.
Hmm.
You can oil your. I oil my nose every day with the nasya. You can
Oh,
oil your
really?
ears. Oil pulling comes from Ayurveda. If you heard
Yep.
of oil pulling, you can oil your navel. You oil your feet before bedtime. So we keep using the skin as a channel of consumption because we know that our digestive system cannot take huge amounts of fat as we get older, but we keep using our skin as a channel of consumption. And they know that now microbiome is lipophilic, which means that they thrive on good microbiome, thrives on oils of your own skin, which dry as you get older. But then just that the practice of oiling your body is a big part of Ayurveda rituals, and making sure you have good foods, making sure you're resting as much as you are working, making sure you have certain breath practices, which again bring that moisture in the body. There's a lot of
Hmm.
breathing practices which bring moisture in the body. So the idea is drying is dying. Save your reserves, save your fluids, save your moisture, right?
Mm,
The longer you are fertile, the longer. And it's the same thing, right? That's how from summer you go into winter. The
that's
spring is
right.
wet. Spring is wet and juicy. And then as the end of summer, things start to dry out, and then you get into the winter.
Wow. So, doctor, like when you oil pull, like I know people use coconut, but my mom's from Korea and we use sesame seed oil for everything. That's all we ever use. But I didn't know like when you I had a really good friend who had forgive me, it's like a practice they like his practitioners from India and they would do such beautiful work like with oil on
Yeah,
the way they did it and their
Abhyanga, yeah.
abdominal, yeah, they would go away. Like I would be testing and I was like, this has gone away in like in a day. Like it was
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
So do you have a certain oil you like to use like for your oil for everything?
So yeah, you'll be surprised to hear, but in Ayurveda, when they use the word oil, the default is sesame oil. It is sesame oil.
Oh,
Coconut
yes.
coconut is a modern Ayurvedic addition. Coconut never existed in the ancient texts. It was always sesame oil,
Mm,
by the way. But because sesame oil can be a little bit warming to the system, it's a little issue. Coconut comes from the coconut fruit, it grows up there, and the sesame comes from a seed. Seeds have this warm potential because they have to, grow into something
right.
larger. Um, so sesame oil can be warming. And so that's when the modern day and a lot of, for other reasons, biological reasons of where Ayurveda is thriving in India is in the southern part, but there's a lot of coconuts. Coconut oil has become popular. So
Mm,
sesame oil is always the default oil, but I tell people that if you feel like sesame is reacting with you, you're not liking it, then you try another oil. But there's a lot of herbal oils in Ayurveda. Very like there are herbal body oils. To be honest with you, Dr. Motley, I keep it simple. I say go to Trader Joe's if you're living in the United States, get the
yep.
lemongrass coconut oil, which has a little bit of almond oil in it. It just says coconut oil, but it's really coconut almond oil, lemongrass coconut, and just use that for your body massage.
Oh,
For
really?
your for your body, yeah, every day you massage your body with it. For your mouth, try coconut and try sesame and see how you feel with both. I use sesame every day for oil pulling.
Oh,
That's what
that's
I use. And nasal drops. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation because it's the most underrated practice and the highly beneficial practice. It's a gift to the world. Is the practice of instilling a drop of a certain oil in your nostrils every day, which rebuilds the microbiome, cleans your sinuses, goes to your brain because the nose is the only place where the blood-brain barrier does not exist. I mean, it is just brilliant. The practice of nasya, it's called nasya, and you get
Nastya.
special. Yeah, NASYA, and you get special nasya oil. So you basically oil everything, and you oil everything. You keep good fats in your food. You do practices, and I do want to touch upon the breath as well. So we'll get to
Yep.
that in a
Yep.
moment. So traditionally oiled sesame, just to answer your question in the longest way that I possibly could, I did. And then if your sesame doesn't work for you, try coconut, but make
Okay.
sure it's not refined. Nothing should be refined. That's toxic. Uh, Now, and the second thing I said, the number of breaths you come with are predetermined.
Predetermined. Yes.
All of the yogic texts and Ayurveda will tell you that, right? And when we are living in this highly strung, highly stressed out environment, we shorten our breaths. We all know that. That's why at the end of a busy day, we'll sigh out.
Yes.
We become mouth breathers. If you're a mouth breather, you will have a shorter breath. And inhalations
Oh.
set our body into the sympathetic, which means into the action mode, right? And exhalations take your body into the repair mode, parasympathetic. When we're busy, when we're stressed out, when we're working so hard, we're barely exhaling. We're just doing very short inhales,
Uh,
and we're using up all our resources. And so the focus is on bringing back slow breaths, deep breathing, and yogis, and people measure this, right? So a normal human being, you and I, while we're chatting, we probably are breathing like whatever, maybe 15, 12 to 20 breaths per minute.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
When we are stressed and hyperventilating, sometimes it can be 40 to 60 breaths per minute.
Wow.
When we are meditating, it's like yogis challenge themselves to come down to 4 to 6 breaths a minute.
Four
So
to
the I
six.
4 to 6, and that practice by itself brings back moisture in the body. It repairs you at such a deep level. So my ask for everybody who's listening to this is, there's a breath called the resonance breath. Just look for it online. Use the breathing app. It's for free,
Mm-hmm.
and you start practicing slow exhales. It is my biggest tool in my toolkit. Is when I want to slow down, I go into that longer exhale. And through the nose, everything's through the nose. You do it through the mouth, it doesn't count. It doesn't.
Okay, out through the mouth, it doesn't count because that's that would be why, Dr. Pandya, that means that whenever you do yoga, they would always say, take a breath in or breath, and they could hold the breath as you breathe out.
Hmm.
And I used to always wonder, like, why do they make us breathe out? Because I'd feel uncomfortable. My diaphragm would be like off. So that's why, like, they use breath. So when they talk about predetermined, like you practice breathing because is there like I hope I'm not butchering this,
Hmm.
but like there's predetermined numbers of breaths for your life too. So they're like, take the amount of breaths you have and make sure they count. Is that like an idea? Like,
Yes and no. So what it means is that don't use up all your breaths. Your breaths are
ah,
your resources. Like don't work so hard, don't work so fast that you've used up all your breaths in a short period of
mm,
time.
okay, this is perfect. So you're learning about longevity because the answer is there, like about with breathing. So we had longevity, we got food, we've had what we can do with oil pulling. And I know, doctor, everybody has different conditions and different situations. But do you find like any particular herbals that you think is good for longevity or overall general health? Like I will say, like neem to me is like I use, like maybe it has different aspects, but in my practice I use a lot of neem, and it's because I use it for a lot of infectious states with individuals. But I'm not saying it's my go-to, but in Chinese medicine world, like there are a few that a lot of individuals say this is our go-tos, but do they have like particular set, maybe 3 or 4 that you'd really like or that most people should take?
Yeah. So again, right, like every herb, and I tell this to people, to use every herb with caution. In a traditional Ayurvedic setup, people would be so scared to think that we've taken herbs and put them into capsules, right? Because we
Mm.
process herbs, we combine herbs. If spices are different, but herbs are used very, very carefully, because if you just use every traditional Ayurvedic herb is used in a formulation, always more than one
Oh.
herb. It's made into tea. The tea is dried into a paste. The paste is done something else with the paste, and it's cooked in some ghee. It's consumed with some honey. At a certain time of the day, you take it. I mean, it is such a detailed, nuanced science. I do
Oh.
want to talk about neem because you mentioned neem, and if anybody is listening, but I will say that one of the spices, you can call it an herb as well. It's herb spice, great, safe, that people should I think benefits almost everybody is the use of dried ginger. Again, DCM and Ayurveda both are big fans of dried ginger. Dried ginger, not fresh,
Mm,
dried.
right.
Dried ginger has a little sweetness to it, right? Even if you taste it, there's a little bit of sweetness to it. And if it's sweet, it brings down the heat. Fresh ginger can be almost too hot for the system. It can really erode your mucosal lining. But
Mm,
dried
mm,
ginger in your teas, dried ginger in your food, dried ginger in your rice broth can help to really start scraping any of the toxic gunk. Great anti-inflammatory, great antioxidant, great digestive, great to really, we call it sangrahi, which means it really builds all your stools together and helps you to have a bowel movement. I mean, it's brilliant. I can sing praises for dry ginger all day long. And I'm sure all
mm,
traditional Chinese medicine doctors do, but I'll say just start with a hot cup of water, put a few pinches of dry ginger in the morning, make that your first drink for the day, and then you'll see how that goes for you. Don't go to
mm.
town with anything. Don't go crazy if you're not used to anything. Do start slowly. Neem is bitter, right? Neem is bitter and dry. If you see neem powder, and I just wish we still all lived on farms so we would really understand our foods because we touched them, because we grew them. Unfortunately, today there's so much more that's required to understand our food. So neem is very dry,
Mhm,
and an infection by its nature has all this pus and like a little bit of fluid and inflammation. So
mhm,
neem
mhm,
can help to settle it because neem is so drying, it's bitter, it's scraping. And we know that like, it's like if you think of a fatty liver also, which is where the blood has become viscous, and you need that little cooling and scraping. So neem can work for that. But for somebody whose body is already too dry, they
mhm.
can get eczema with neem. They can get so much
Ah,
dryness with neem. So,
mm,
and the reason why I say that is because people who are listening, I don't want you to go and buy neem because you think you have an infection. Work with Dr. Motley and
mm.
he'll tell you whether you should get the neem or not. um, so we are very, very careful about how we dispense herbs.
It's amazing. Like, some of my patients knew that you'd be on the podcast. They were asking. I know this is sort of like shifting, but like I've
Yeah,
heard.
anything you want.
I love like, and I want to talk about the book because I know our time's precious. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I'm so thankful again. Like, but when we
No,
talk
I
about
know.
like
Thank you so much.
Ayurvedic, like with cycles and circadian rhythms, and with ladies who want to become pregnant, and I know you've helped many individuals become pregnant, but I guess generally, can you touch on that, like with
Yeah,
Ayurvedic and ladies who are trying to get pregnant?
yeah. So again, I say, right, when you want to look at a fertile piece of land, talk about fertility, but you start there. You look outside to know what's happening inside. You look at a fertile piece of land. The two things that you're going to look at first to see whether the fertility is how wet the soil is. Again, it is the moisture. How moist is that soil, and
Hmm.
how is the sunlight? And if like a desert, today, what happens with a lot of women is there is only the solar lifestyle, right? Like cutting down on the good fats, working out too much, working many, many hours, not sleeping enough, consuming too much caffeine. And that is that burnout that the body experiences, this whole solar, they become a desert. You become a desert, it's so hard
Whoa.
to create life in the desert. So, but it's never too late. I say it's never too late. Believe it or not, I can prescribe very expensive herbs and do all of that, but I do know that the real solution lies in slowing down, consuming
Whoa.
wholesome good foods while you're sitting down. Can you spend more time in your parasympathetic mode than your sympathetic mode throughout the
Wow.
day? Can you
Yes.
do that? And if when people can do that and they can eat wholesome foods and create that good relationship with foods, look, life wants life. 4.5 billion years, we didn't have to do anything from single cell species to have like this full-fledged planet with, trillions of species living on it, right? So
Hmm.
we did not have to work hard. We are having to work hard today because we've created this threat to life. Global warming
Yes.
outside, inflammation inside, same thing. It's the same thing, overheated systems. uh so I'm just like, so eat wholesome good foods, don't skimp on your fats, exercise but also rest, work but also play, you know do but also be.
Oh,
I
that's good.
basically all of these things, and you'll say that when you are in that mood, life will not keep you away from life. It wants life, it will invite life.
Oh, that's so beautiful, doctor. Because that's like when you talk about the fertile lands. I just love the way that for you guys who are listening, it said she said as in the macro, also in the micro. like if you're talking, doctor, like if you saw a land that was dry and was not getting any water and it wasn't getting cultured and cultivated, how would you expect that to grow something? And I think it's beautiful about how your body responds the same way. If you really want your body to produce something, you'd have to look at it like it is in the macro. So in the micro, in the microcosm, there is a great book a long time ago when I first started school. My friend, who is one of my great mentors, but he gave me this book called Know Your Fats. And remember the time they were saying that cholesterol was bad and fats were bad, and I read this book, and it was just so eye opening about how we've forgotten how important the fats are, and it's, but you've seen they've been teaching it for thousands of years in Ayurvedic medicine, and that's why I love the book, because literally, like with my patients, they'll tell me they have a condition, and I was going through the book, and I would be like, oh, huh, so you have a problem doing that when you go to sleep, and I'm just reading through it, and I'm like, well, you probably have a cycle, this part of your cycle's off, and they'll be like, that's exactly what the problem is, like that's what I have. um I know it's like we've gone over so much with Ayurveda, which I love. One of the most beautiful things I really like about your book, though, is as you go through everything. I was reading through it, and it talked about gratitude and acceptance, and how you incorporate that into the Ayurvedic practices. But when you put this book together, you can tell you have complete gratitude as you write it. You can just tell. I
Oh,
really
thank
mean
you.
it. You can tell that, like the way you put it together. But I know you've had generations of Ayurvedic teaching in your heart to write. But what was the inspiration? You just felt like you needed to put this out, like you knew you had the words in your mouth. You're like, I got to put it into a book.
Honestly, I always wanted to write a book, and I just this was my life's work, and my idea was that I don't wanna sound smart. I don't wanna be the expert. I don't wanna be the know-it-all. I wanna teach people Ayurveda the way I learned it, which is like a first language. I want you to reconnect with yourselves. Like,
Mm,
so my really deep desire for people to reconnect with that wisdom, which I know all of us carry, right? I always say, deer does not wake up and say, oh my God, I have to wake up again in the morning and I have to eat plants. Like, seriously, that's not what the deer says. Like the deer knows, like this is what he looks forward to. This is what inspires him every day. Living well is so innate to us, and we already know. So I wanted to write this book because I was like, I don't want people to come to me again and again. I don't want, like, in this excessive fear of health. You want it to be free. You want it to be feeling connected. So the whole idea of the book is
mm,
like, if you read this book, I want you to be connected to your wisdom, not to my intelligence.
that's true, doctor. And I think that's like, as every practitioner, every doctor is trying to, there is a joy in your heart when you see a patient and they've learned, those light bulbs turn on and they're like, oh, I can do this for myself. Yes, you can do it for yourself. You definitely can. And probably the reason, like, uh, just a lot of the practitioners are doing what they're doing is because they were the ones who did it for themselves. And they're like, oh, I want to learn it and teach it. And I'm so thankful for this copy you gave me. And one thing I wanted to ask, like, you dedicate to your grandfather. Was your grandfather the practitioner too? Like how like big
Mhm.
influence he was on your life?
Mhm. Yeah, he's the one who brought Ayurveda into my life, into all our lives in my home and family. And he lived, he walked the talk, and he's taught me how to walk the talk. And I think of him every single day. So this is really what has been my inspiration.
Oh, I'm telling you that. I mean, I would love, and I say this with all my heart, like, I love different aspects and angles. So I know you're very busy, doctor, but if I ever have questions that need to be answered in the Ayurvedic realm, I'm going
Oh,
to have you come back on, because I truly, I have friends that are mentors in Chinese medicine, and those are the people I have to call and just ask them, like, what's going on with these individuals. And I love your book. It's like, and I'm serious. I was telling my producer Christy, I was like, that is an amazing title. It's like your body already knows. It's like you just said, like you're teaching them how to learn to read their own bodies, basically. Um, and so before we leave, anytime, I know I asked like a personal question, not like too invasive, but I always ask
ask me
like
anything
fun
you want,
questions.
anything.
I
Nothing's
do. I say,
invasive.
what's your favorite kind of music? I ask different
Favorite kind of
questions.
music. Oh my God. I would have to put two genres. I like hip hop, believe it or not, and
Okay.
I like Indian classical. So very
Ooh.
different, very, very different. Again, depending on the time of day, I will pick what I want to, what's working for
Wow.
my
See?
neurotransmitters at that point.
Okay, see? I love knowing these things. So like if any time comes up, I'm like, we need to make sure she has a great hip hop album or something like that. So this is great. And okay, so where can people find you? I know like on Instagram, on socials, on the internet, where can they find you?
So you can find me on my website, which is my first name .me. So Nidhi.me, super easy.
Mhm.
Um, and you can find me on my social. I basically on Instagram, and that's plenty. That's more than I can handle. But it's my underscore Ayurvedic underscore life. But it is a great place to start, getting snippets of the work that I do on Ayurveda. So these are the two places where it's the easiest to find me.
Oh, well, Doctor, thank you so much again for coming on with us. And for everybody out there, truly remember, like she said, micro and macro. Sometimes when patients come into us, they'll ask us like, Doc, why is like the tip of my nose red? Or why do my fingernails peel like this? Or why do I get these age spots? Those are the small signs of the wisdom that's innate in our body that's trying to tell us something goes on. And that's why you want to follow what she talks about in the book. So look into that wisdom. And I'm just so thankful that we got to come on and share this with us. So everybody here at the Ancient Health Podcast, what our goal is exactly like yours, Dr. Pandya. Like we want to make sure that people realize that there's so much information internal already here, and you just got to unlock it. So all of you out there, if you know anybody that has any kind of questions that wants to be taken into an alternative health mode, please send them this podcast. If you guys like this kind of information, love to hear about Ayurvedic, please send the comments. We'll have the doctor back on. And we're so thankful you tuned in. Hit the bell so that you get reminded whenever you have a new podcast come up. And from all of us here at the Ancient Health Podcast, thank you again, doctor, for coming on. And I hope you guys out there have a great day. Thanks so much.